London, 1788. The gas lamps flicker dimly through a fog that smells of soot and sewage. A woman hurries home from the theater, clutching her shawl tight. Her heels click fast on the cobblestones. Then, a shadow steps from the alley. A whisper. A sudden stab of pain. She screams, and when the crowd rushes to her aid, her gown is torn, and blood stains the silk. No money stolen, no assault beyond the wound, just a slash, a cut, and the echo of laughter disappearing into the dark. This was no ordinary criminal. London was under attack by something far stranger. They would come to call him the London Monster. For more than 2 years, the city would live in fear as reports flooded in from terrified women claiming to be attacked by a maniac with a knife, a pin, or even a blade hidden in a bouquet of flowers. No one knew his face. No one knew his motive, only that he hated women and that he struck without warning. The newspapers went wild, pamphlets sold by the thousands, and soon, every dark alley became a breeding ground for terror. This is the story of mass panic, public outrage, and mystery, one that still haunts London's history books. I'm your host, and this is Mystery Fact File, where the past refuses to rest in peace. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of the London Monster of the 1700s. To understand the terror that gripped the city, we must step back in time to Georgian London, the late 18th century. It was an age of polished manners and hidden depravity. The rich danced in ballrooms under candlelight, while the poor rotted in alleys just outside. Crime was everywhere. The police, as we know them today, did not yet exist, and rumor spread faster than fire. London's gossip culture was thriving. Coffee houses, print shops, and taverns were the social networks of the day, places where scandal and fear mixed freely. So when whispers began about a mysterious figure attacking women on the streets, it was the perfect storm. The first reports were almost unbelievable. Women claimed they had been followed, insulted, and then stabbed, not with swords or guns, but with needles, knives, or sharpened metal spikes. Some were wounded in the thigh, others in the hip or backside. A few even reported the man had slashed their clothing, cutting through layers of fabric without them realizing until it was too late. Each story shared a pattern, a strange encounter, a sudden pain, and a man vanishing into the shadows. By 1790, panic had consumed the city. Londoners organized patrol groups to protect women at night. Men wore badges declaring themselves Monster Watch, and women began carrying scissors, daggers, or even homemade weapons in self-defense. What had started as rumor had become mass hysteria. By the summer of 1789, London was in the grip of collective fear. The monster, as newspapers had branded him, had already struck dozens of times. Each new report was bloodier, stranger, more shocking. No one knew what he looked like. Some said he was tall, dressed in black, and spoke with a refined accent. Others swore he wore a red waistcoat or a long gray cloak that hid his face. A few even claimed he used disguises. A gentleman one night, a beggar the next. But one detail stayed the same. The attacks were always against women. Young women, often attractive and fashionably dressed, walking alone or with a friend. In one account, Anne Porter, a respectable woman of Bloomsbury, said she was approached by a well-dressed man who complimented her beauty, then suddenly slashed her gown and stabbed her hip. She screamed. He fled. Another, Maria Smith, claimed she was pricked by a needle while receiving a bouquet of flowers from a charming stranger. Within seconds, blood trickled down her dress. The man simply smiled and walked away. Some wounds were shallow, more like pinpricks. Others deep enough to cause fainting or lasting scars. But it wasn't only the pain, it was the violation. The women described a feeling of being chosen, hunted, as though the monster knew them. And that fear spread faster than the attacks themselves. Women refused to walk alone after dark. Parents forbade their daughters to go out unescorted. Theaters and concerts saw empty seats where once the fashionable elite had gathered. London had turned inward, a city under siege by its own paranoia. And yet, the monster seemed to feed on that panic. Every newspaper that printed another rumor gave him more power. Each new account exaggerated the last, until he became less a man and more a legend. Was there truly a single attacker, or had fear itself become the monster? The line between fact and fiction blurred completely in early 1790. Women began accusing men on the street, random strangers, of being the monster. Crowds formed in seconds. Suspects were beaten in public squares. And when one young man, Renwick Williams, a 23-year-old artificial flower maker, was accused, the city erupted. Williams fit the rumor well enough. Handsome, polite, and known for complimenting women on their appearance. He was quickly branded the monster and thrown in jail. But the evidence? Thin, almost laughably so. Some victims swore he was the man. Others said he looked nothing like their attacker. Still, the newspapers declared the case closed, and the public demanded blood. Renwick Williams sat behind bars at Newgate Prison, insisting he was innocent. He claimed he'd been framed by jealous rivals or angry lovers. He said he was merely flirtatious, not violent, that his only crime was talking to women in public. But London wanted a monster, and they found one in him. During the trial, the courtroom overflowed with spectators. Tickets were sold for entry, like seats at a play. Pamphlets and sketches of the London monster circulated, showing him as a grotesque villain with wild eyes and blood-stained hands. When Williams was brought before the judge, the crowd jeered and threw rotten fruit. He was charged with assault and wounding with intent to maim, disfigure, and disable. The testimonies were chaotic. Some women told detailed stories of being attacked. Others hesitated, saying they weren't entirely sure. But the pressure was enormous, not just from the media, but from the public hysteria itself. To acquit him would be to admit that the monster was still out there. So the verdict was inevitable. Renwick Williams was found guilty and sentenced to 6 years in prison. And yet, once he was locked away, the attacks did not completely stop. There were still reports of women being stabbed or slashed in the streets, though fewer and less sensational. Enough to raise an uncomfortable question. Had they imprisoned the wrong man, or had London's hysteria simply burned itself out? Historians remain divided. Some argue Williams was innocent, a convenient scapegoat sacrificed to calm public outrage. Others believe he was at least partly guilty, a disturbed man who inspired copycats, and some go even further. They suggest the monster never existed at all, that the entire affair was a product of mass psychogenic illness, what we'd now call collective delusion. In a society already obsessed with reputation, scandal, and fear of female virtue, a wave of fabricated or exaggerated assaults could easily have spiraled into chaos. The London monster, they say, was not a man, but a mirror, reflecting the city's own moral panic, its repressed desires, and its hunger for drama. Even the newspapers admitted years later that many reports were impossible to verify. But by then, it didn't matter. The monster had entered legend, a ghostly figure stalking the 18th century imagination. When Renwick Williams was finally sent to prison, London exhaled a long, uneasy sigh of relief. For the first time in 2 years, people dared to believe that the nightmare had ended. But beneath that fragile calm, doubts simmered. Some whispered that the real monster was still out there, watching. Others claimed they'd seen him again. A shadow darting through alleys, a whisper in the fog. The attacks didn't vanish overnight. There were still scattered reports, a woman's gown torn near Holborn, another pricked with a pin near Covent Garden. But the newspapers grew quieter, the outrage cooled, and soon, London's attention drifted elsewhere. Yet the story of the London Monster refused to die. Pamphleteers turned the case into penny literature. Street performers reenacted the attacks for morbid amusement. Even polite society whispered his name at candlelit dinner tables, half in horror, half in fascination. Because deep down, the city loved its monster. He had become part of its identity, a tale of scandal, violence, and moral decay that reflected something raw and thrilling about London itself. And perhaps that's why his legend endured. Writers and poets referenced him in passing, a symbol of hidden corruption and hypocrisy. Artists depicted him as a grotesque caricature, a gentleman by day, a fiend by night. He haunted the collective imagination, resurfacing in whispers for decades afterward. Even William Wordsworth, the great Romantic poet, mentioned the London Monster in a letter, as if acknowledging that this bizarre chapter was more than gossip. It was a reflection of human madness. But what truly made the case so unsettling wasn't the violence. It was the ambiguity, the idea that no one ever really knew who or what the monster was. Because if Renwick Williams was innocent, that meant someone else was out there, unpunished. And if he was guilty, then how could so many witnesses be wrong about what they saw and felt? The line between predator and victim, hysteria and truth, blurred until they were indistinguishable. In a sense, the London Monster was less a man and more a manifestation of collective anxiety, born from a society teetering between the Enlightenment's logic and the lingering shadows of superstition. The late 1700s were an age of transformation. Science and reason were replacing faith and fear, but not entirely. Londoners were caught in between, yearning for explanation but drawn irresistibly to mystery. And so, when the monster appeared, it was as if that conflict had taken physical form, an invisible force prowling the city's psyche. The rational mind demanded a culprit. But the fearful heart whispered that something darker was at work, something beyond comprehension. Was it simply a man with a knife, or a legend born from mass hysteria and suppressed desire? Perhaps both. Because, as history has shown time and again, when fear and fascination intertwine, monsters are inevitable. Centuries have passed since the London Monster's reign of terror. The city that once trembled at his name is now a modern metropolis. Its streets paved and bright, its fears replaced by new ones. But even today, scholars and storytellers return to that strange period of hysteria, trying to unravel what truly happened between 1788 and 1790. Some see it as a case study in psychology, one of the earliest recorded examples of mass moral panic. Others treat it as a historical curiosity, an urban legend that grew from rumor and fear. But maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, because the documents still exist, the court records, the letters, the police reports. They speak of real people, real wounds, real terror. And yet, reading them feels like peering into a dream or a nightmare that London itself once had. Every few decades, the story reemerges. Writers rediscover it, podcasts discuss it, and people once again ask the same questions. Who was the London Monster? Was Renwick Williams truly guilty? Or was he, like so many others, merely a victim of the city's hunger for a villain? Modern criminologists have pointed out that the description of the monster's attacks, sudden stabbing motions, superficial wounds, theatrical gestures, suggest the acts of an attention-seeking sadist rather than a true murderer. A man intoxicated not by death, but by fear itself. And that, perhaps, is what the monster represents most clearly. Fear as entertainment, violence as spectacle. Even in the 1700s, before the age of mass media, Londoners discovered something we still live with today, that horror sells, that the unknown, however terrifying, is also magnetic. And so the monster lingers, not in prisons or graves, but in the imagination, a phantom stitched together by gossip, fear, and fascination. Every city has its own version of him. Every age creates its monsters to explain what it cannot understand. And maybe that's what truly haunts us. Because if the London monster never existed, if he was merely a reflection of our own fear, then the real horror lies not in him, but in us. I'm your host from Mystery Fact File. If you've made it this far into the darkness, tell me, do you believe the London monster ever truly existed? Or was it all an illusion, a nightmare the city created for itself? Let me know your theory in the comments. And remember, some mysteries never die. They just wait in the shadows.